Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. It was the final nail in the coffin. Since taking office, Donald Trump has done everything to appease Vladimir Putin, from offering a Ukraine peace deal on Russia's terms to making a pitch to lift economic sanctions. Last night, the US backed Russia's position on Ukraine at the United Nations, a forum where the US and Russia have clashed time and again. During the Cold War, the UN was a battleground for the Americans and the Soviet Union. And in the modern day, Joe Biden used the United Nations to isolate and embarrass Russia. But with yesterday's vote, Trump has effectively reversed American foreign policy on Russia. And in the process, he has fractured the Western alliance. So with America out of the picture, who is supporting Ukraine now? Where does India stand in this conflict? And what does Putin want? What is his idea of a peace deal? What are his demands? We'll discuss that tonight. Meanwhile, French President Macron also met Trump, shook his hand and shot to the headlines. But has he been able to sway the American leader? Also, why is South Africa targeting American big tech? Is this a message to Trump? How the Bangladesh army chief has lashed out at the country's political leadership. Why Starbucks is firing people and trimming its menu. What happened to the beaches on Mars? And is the market for artificial intelligence shrinking? All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Iran rules out direct talks with the United States on its nuclear program. This comes a day after Washington imposed fresh sanctions on Tehran. The Iranian foreign minister made the announcement after meeting his Russian counterpart. Last month, Tehran had signed a strategic partnership treaty with Moscow. Taiwan detains a Chinese crude cargo ship after an undersea cable was severed off the island. This is the latest in a series of such disruptions in Taiwan. Taipei fears Beijing could sever its communication links to seize the self-ruled island. African regional blocs push for peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Former leaders from Ethiopia, Kenya and Nigeria appointed to oversee the process. Rwanda-backed M23 rebels have seized large swathes in eastern DR Congo, triggering a humanitarian crisis. Indonesia and Apple agree on the terms to lift the ban on iPhone 16. This ends months of negotiations between Jakarta and the tech giant. Last October, Indonesia banned the marketing and sale of the iPhone 16 after Apple failed to meet its local investment regulations. And India relief for badminton player Lakshya Sen. Supreme Court stays all coercive action against the 23-year-old. Earlier, the Karnataka High Court had rejected Sen's plea to quash a probe against him. The ace shuttler has been accused of forging his birth certificate to participate in underage badminton tournaments.
Not backwards. A resolution focused on one simple idea: ending the war.
Європою вам на підтримку за те, що ми разом. Я пишаюсь.
America's pivot is complete. In 2022, Washington was the biggest critic of Russia. 3 years later, it's a cheerleader, all thanks to Donald Trump. Yesterday marked 3 years of Russia's war. Ukraine and Europe prepared a UN resolution to mark the day. It called out Russian aggression. It also demanded a withdrawal of troops from Ukraine. 93 countries backed this resolution, 18 opposed it, and among those opposing, was the United States of America. It's a weird list to look at. You've got Russia, you've got North Korea, you've got Belarus and Mali, and then right at the end you have the United States of America. Now, just to be clear, abstention was an option in the General Assembly. As always, India abstained from voting on the resolution. So did 64 other countries. They abstained. But the US made a conscious decision to reject instead of abstain. They rejected. the resolution. It's a clear statement of support for Russia. Before voting, the US tried to lobby its Western allies. Washington wanted to kill this resolution. They wanted to adopt their own, a weaker draft that did not mention Russian aggression. That's what the Americans wanted. They wanted a draft that talked about a vague peace. But Europe and Ukraine refused to back it. Thus, the General Assembly passed the first draft. But in the Security Council, the US had better luck. Remember, the Council has been deadlocked since 2022. It has not been able to pass a single resolution on this war. Why? Because Russia has a veto. They simply shot down all Western drafts. But yesterday, that streak was broken. The United Nations Security Council adopted America's weaker resolution. The Security Council has 15 members, 5 permanent, the remaining are rotating, the remaining 10. Yesterday, 10 members supported the American resolution, 5 others abstained. These were Britain, France, Denmark, Greece, and Slovenia. All of them are allies of America. Russia was, of course, thrilled by the outcome. They welcomed the change in the US position.
We see that the United States is taking a much more balanced position, which really helps the efforts aimed at resolving the conflict in Ukraine. We certainly welcome this. We believe that such a balanced position speaks of a real desire to contribute to a settlement.
There are 2 trends to note here. First, the US is splitting with the West. They're not just ditching Ukraine, they're embracing Russia. And second, overall support for Kyiv is down. We looked at a similar UN resolution from March 2022 and we compared it to yesterday. Look at the difference. In 2022, 141 countries supported Ukraine, only 5 countries voted against them, and only 35 abstained. This is how things stood in 2022. Yesterday, 93 countries backed Ukraine, 18 opposed them, and abstentions, 65. This shows a change in global attitude. Yes, the majority still opposes Russia's war, but support for Ukraine is dwindling. We can't be sure why that's happening. Maybe it's war fatigue, maybe it's the Trump effect, or maybe they feel it's time to end this suffering. Either way, the shift in sentiment is clear. And Putin senses it too. He's keen to push on with the peace talks, but he wants to keep it exclusive. The Russian president says right now it's between Russia and the US. They will discuss the way forward. And what about Ukraine and Europe? Well, they can join later.
To address complex and even pressing issues, including the Ukrainian track, both Russia and the US must take the first step. What does it entail? This first step should focus on increasing the level of trust between both states. But what do the Europeans have to do with this? It concerns bilateral Russian-American relations. Why do we need them there?
Putin wants to deal directly with Donald Trump. He wants to keep Europe out. And after yesterday's UN showdown, you can see why. Trump is open to giving Putin concessions, but Europe is not. Their position is more hawkish. If Europe is at the table, they may scuttle the deal. Hence, Putin wants to deal only with Donald Trump, and the US president is game. He says a peace deal will benefit Putin.
I think it's to the very much benefit of Russia to make a deal and to go on with leading Russia in a very positive way. That's what you have to do. But I really believe that he wants to make a deal. Maybe wrong, but I believe he wants to make a deal.
So Putin and Trump are ready to settle it. Meanwhile, Europe is sulking. They're trying desperately to show solidarity with Kyiv. More than a dozen European leaders visited Ukraine on Monday. The EU Council held a moment of silence, and European landmarks were lit up in Ukraine's colors. Take a look. Well, this is all performative. It will not help Ukraine in the war. The momentum is clearly with the Russians now. They're keen to push on. This morning, Russia launched a massive aerial attack. 7 missiles and 213 drones. That's what Russia fired today. Air raid sirens were ringing across Ukraine. Even Poland scrambled fighter jets out of concern. On Sunday, we saw a similar assault. Russia launched over 250 drones on that day. It's clearly a well-thought-out plan. Ukraine is occupied with Trump's threats and insults, so Russia is cashing in. They're upping the pressure on the battlefield. So we have Trump's wish list. We've also heard the demands of Ukraine and Europe. But what about Russia? What does Vladimir Putin want? What is his idea of a peace deal? The Russian president has been dropping hints, like this one.
Their participation in the negotiation process is in demand, of course. We never refused. We had constant discussions with them. At some point, under all sorts of far-fetched ideas to defeat Russia on the battlefield, they themselves refused to have contacts with us. If they want to come back, they are welcome.
Putin gave another interview yesterday. He's actively engaging with the press. It shows that he expects a positive outcome. He's ready to talk. With Trump and the US leaning towards him, Putin senses an opportunity. This could be his best shot at securing a deal that favors Moscow, a deal that is delivered on Putin's terms. That could explain the sudden wave of public statements from the Russian president. But what exactly is he aiming for? His recent comments and those from officials in the Kremlin offer some insights. We just heard how the Russian president feels about Europe. He blames Europe for cutting off diplomatic contact, and now he's in no mood to make concessions.
I don't see anything wrong here. Well, probably no one here can demand anything, especially from Russia. Let them demand it from someone else.
Let them take their demands to someone else. That's Putin's message to Europe, to leaders who say that the peace deal must address Europe's security concerns. The Russian president has dismissed this demand. He said, and I quote, for centuries, they have been making demands of their vassals. Now their own people are making demands of them. They should sit at home and think about how they ended up in this situation. Vladimir Putin has left no room for doubt. Meanwhile, Europe's alliance with America is in a flux. Trump's pivot has put a question mark on the future of NATO, and Russia will try to make the most of this divide. Then we come to the issue of security guarantees. Zelensky wants that. He wants security guarantees as a precondition to the deal. He wants Western troops to protect his countries. Now, some European countries are open to the idea. They want to send troops to secure Ukraine. Will Putin agree? Apparently he will. That's according to Donald Trump. He says he discussed it with Putin and that the Russian leader has no problems. He is okay with European troop deployments in Ukraine. Now remember, this is Trump's assertion. But the Russians are telling a different story. Here's what their foreign minister said.
We explained to our colleagues today what President Putin has repeatedly stressed, that the expansion of NATO, the absorption of Ukraine by the North Atlantic Alliance, is a direct threat to the interests of the Russian Federation, a direct threat to our sovereignty. That's why we explained today that the appearance of armed forces from the same NATO countries, but under a false flag, under the flag of the European Union or under national flags, does not change anything in this regard. Of course, this is unacceptable to us.
И нашими целями были только те объекты, которые напрямую.
Russia doesn't want NATO in its backyard. It is one of the reasons why Putin went to war in Ukraine. In fact, he wants NATO to withdraw from Eastern Europe. It's been one of Moscow's key demands. It's a demand that they made in Saudi Arabia too during the talks with America. Moscow says this is a precondition to normalize relations with the US. Now let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. These are Russia's three broad demands: no Western troops in Ukraine, no concessions to Europe, and no NATO in Eastern Europe. Three key demands, all of which point to one goal. Putin wants Ukraine isolated and firmly out of the Western orbit. As of today, Russia controls around 20% of Ukrainian territory. They're unlikely to give it up. They will keep the Ukrainian land that they control. So even after the war, even after this peace deal, Putin will have more than a foothold in Ukraine, something that ensures long-term leverage over Kyiv. The Russian president believes he can achieve this by striking a direct deal with the US. And unlike Trump, the Russian side seems to be in no rush. Putin says an agreement will take time. The details still need to be worked out. First, he wants to rebuild trust. He wants the US to rebuild trust with Russia.
During the phone conversation and at the meeting in Riyadh, we certainly touched on issues related to the Ukrainian crisis. However, it was not discussed in essence. We only agreed that we would approach it.
He says they've only agreed to approach it. Trump, on the other hand, is clearly in a hurry. He wants a swift deal on Ukraine. He wants a quick foreign policy win. But Moscow is playing hardball. They have proven to be the masters of strategic patience, and Vladimir Putin is dictating the terms and the pace of these peace talks.
President Macron was very special.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Smart customer. I will the war stopped. By the way, that is the most beautiful language. I have no idea what he's saying, but that is the most elegant, beautiful language. Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money, to be clear.
It began like most meetings with a handshake. But it wasn't like most handshakes. It was a Trumpian handshake, bone grinding, knuckle whitening, and a show of pure dominance. World leaders tend to struggle with it, but not Emmanuel Macron. The French president met it head on.
Wish you a recovery and a prompt recovery.
Thank you.
Should federal workers be listening to their agencies or Elon Musk?
Well, these two have a long history of handshake duels. The first one was in 2017 during Trump's visit to France. Then there was one in 2024 when Trump, as the US president-elect, was in Paris for the Notre Dame opening. And now we have another one in 2025. It's like frenemies meeting at a high school reunion. Now, Macron and Trump have had a mostly friendly relationship. The bonhomie was on display during the American leader's first term. They laughed, they hugged, they slapped each other's backs. And this time, too, we saw more of it. Macron was the first European leader to meet Trump at the White House, and the PDA, we have to say, was out of control.
Today's a big day in that we had a G7, and President Macron was a very special man in my book. We were together. We did it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
By the way, that is the most beautiful language. I have no idea what he's saying, but that is the most elegant, beautiful language. Go ahead, please.
But beyond the camaraderie, the battle lines were clear. Tensions are high over Ukraine. There's back and forth over European security. The transatlantic relationship is strained. So Macron arrived with a mission to ensure that Europe is not just a spectator, that it gets a seat at the table. The question is, did he pull it off? Did he get Europe a seat at the table? First, let's look at the things that the two leaders agreed on, starting with European security. The US has long been a security guarantor for Europe. Now Donald Trump wants them to step up. He wants them to shoulder more of their security needs. It has led to a scramble in Europe. Countries are debating defense spending. But the French president agrees with Trump. He too believes that Europe needs to do more.
I'm also pleased that President Macron agrees that the cost and burden of securing the peace must be borne by the nations of Europe, not alone by the United States. And Europe must take that central role in assuring long-term security of Ukraine, which they want to do.
The second thing is the Ukraine peace deal. Macron says a truce is just weeks away, and he floated the idea of a European peacekeeping force in Ukraine, but there were some strict conditions. No frontline action, no involvement in direct conflict, and most crucially, the need for US backup.
As for France, a lot of my European colleagues are ready to be engaged. But we do need this American backup because this is part of the credibility of the security guarantees, and this is our collective deterrence capacity.
Yeah, European troops may go into Ukraine as peacemakers. So when the agreement is done, they can watch that everything is followed properly. I don't think that's going to be a problem. And a lot of the European countries, I don't want to speak for France, but I know that the president's talked about doing that also.
The third thing is the minerals deal, controlling Ukraine's rare earth minerals to make up for US aid. We'll tell you more about the deal later. For now, do know that Donald Trump wants this deal and Macron did not seem to mind it. In fact, he lauded what he called the strong American involvement.
It looks like we're getting very close. The deal's being worked on, and we're, I think, getting very close to getting an agreement where we get our money back over a period of time. But it also gives us something where I think it's very beneficial to their economy, to them as a country.
Look, I think this discussion is a very important one. First, because it's important for the US, and it will be a good occasion for a first very important meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky. Second, I think there is a lot of economic upside on both sides.
So those are the three things they agreed on. Now on to the points of contention. The first was Ukrainian aid. Trump claimed that Europe was only lending money to Ukraine and they expected a repayment. Macron rejected this. In fact, he interrupted Trump mid-sentence.
Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money, to be clear. We have 230 billion frozen assets in Europe, Russian assets, but this is not as a collateral of a loan because this is not our belonging. So they are frozen. If at the end of the day in the negotiation we will have with Russia, they're ready to give it to us, super. It will be loan at the end of the day and Russia will have paid for that.
If you believe that, it's okay with me.
Mr. President,
but they get their money back, we don't, and now we do. But you know, that's only fair.
Mr. President,
Trump doesn't like being interrupted, so this was sort of a diplomatic judo move from Macron, and he seems to have pulled it off. Trump did shoot back, though. Macron had clearly made his point by then. Europe was not just tagging along, it was paying the bills, and it wanted respect. The other disagreement was on Putin. Trump was asked if he views Putin as a dictator, and this was his answer.
President, you called Zelensky a dictator. Would you use the same words regarding Putin?
I don't use those words lightly. I think that we're going to see how it all works out. Let's see what happens.
Meanwhile, Macron did not shy away. He called Putin an aggressor and said that Russia has violated Ukraine's peace. So the talks weren't all harmonious. The contrast was quite stark. And the outcome? Did Macron manage to keep Europe in the game? You could say the French president did what he came to do. He charmed, he challenged, and at times he contradicted Trump. Most importantly, he kept Europe in the conversation. But the real test is yet to come. It is not clear if he's managed to sway Donald Trump to let Europe have a say, to let them participate in the peace talks. We'll have to wait and see. how that played out.
Європа разом з Америкою. Ми маємо.
Amid all this diplomacy, one thing keeps popping up, and that is the mineral deal. It's a proposed agreement between Ukraine and the US. For what? Ukraine's mineral wealth. Think of it as a business transaction. Ukraine shares its minerals with America. In return, they get US protection. That is the deal in a nutshell. Zelensky first proposed this idea to Donald Trump. It was part of his so-called victory plan. And Trump did take the bait, but he took it too far. Reports say he demanded $500 billion worth of minerals. He also did not give security guarantees in return. So Zelensky refused to sign it. But now there seems to be some progress. Ukraine says the talks are in the final stages, and yesterday Trump said Zelensky would visit the White House soon, possibly to sign the mineral deal.
I will be meeting with President Zelensky. In fact, he may come in this week or next week to sign the agreement, and which would be nice. I'd love to meet him. Would meet at the Oval Office. So the agreement's being worked on now. They're very close to a final deal. It'll be a deal with rare earths and various other things.
So the deal could be signed soon, which raises two questions. One, does it include security guarantees? And two, what does each side get? The answer to the first question is no. Some US media outlets have accessed the draft document. It reaffirms Ukraine's sovereignty, but it does not offer guarantees. Nor does it promise more US military aid in the future. Instead, it focuses on investment. Ukraine will have to give up 50% of its revenue from natural resources. Say there's a new mine being built. It generates $100 million in revenue. Ukraine will have to give up half of that to a special fund, a fund that is going to be jointly held by the US and Ukraine. And what will happen to that money? Some of it will be reinvested in Ukraine, and the rest free to take home, I guess. Now, this is an improvement for Kyiv. The previous draft did not have joint ownership. It said the US alone would control this investment fund. The new draft has tweaked that, which brings us to the second question. What does each side get? Well, the US has pumped billions into Ukraine. They can recoup some of that money. Plus, they will have access to crucial resources. Ukraine is home to 5% of the world's critical raw materials. That's around 2.6 billion tons of deposits, 2.6 billion tons. Total value, some estimates say $11.5 trillion. That's what Ukraine has. This includes certain strategically important items like graphite, lithium, and cobalt. We need these items to make things like batteries and solar panels. But right now, China controls them. Take lithium, for example. China controls 67% of the global lithium supply, so America wants a backup in Ukraine. You see, Trump does not see this deal as a political one. For him, it's about money. He wants to recoup what America spent in Ukraine. It's as simple as that. So any security guarantee will be financial. Say the Americans invest in mines or factories in Ukraine. Would Putin risk attacking them? Would he target US assets or investments in Ukraine? Kyiv will be hoping that he will not. But Putin is a wily customer. He wants in on the mineral deal. He says he will help American companies process minerals from Russia.
We are ready to attract foreign partners to the so-called new, our historical territories, which have returned to the Russian Federation. There are also certain reserves of rare earth minerals. We are ready to work there with our partners, including American ones.
This is very significant. Putin says US companies can extract resources from Russian land, even those taken away from Ukraine. And this could be a game changer because a big chunk of Ukraine's reserves are in the east, in areas currently occupied by Russia. Plus, these reserves are largely untouched, meaning you will have to invest a lot of money to extract them. It's still worth the risk. Even Europe seems to be realizing that. After Trump, the EU is also pitching a mineral deal. And this is the same EU that had slammed Trump's proposal, but now they want in. A top EU official has pitched the plan to Kyiv. He called it a win-win deal. As for the Trump proposal, we have to wait and watch. We cannot make a judgment before the terms are published. But as things stand, one thing is quite clear. This is not a long-term guarantee for Ukraine. This is a temporary measure, maybe a desperate one, to keep Trump on their side. Our next story is from South Africa. The country has taken aim at US tech giants. Google, YouTube, Facebook, X, all of these companies are in Pretoria's crosshairs. They've all been pulled up by South Africa's Competition Commission. It says these US tech titans are undermining South African media houses and that American algorithms favor global news outlets at the expense of South African media companies. The biggest offender is apparently Google. In fact, let me read a part of that statement. This is what it says. Google's monopoly position and the unequal bargaining position of the media means that there has not been an equitable share of value between Google and news publishers in South Africa. The Google algorithm distorts competition between news media organizations. Those were the charges. And what is the solution? Apparently an annual fine. Between about $16 and $27 million for 3 to 5 years. That is what South Africa wants to charge Google. It also came up with orders for Facebook and X. Pretoria wants the social media platforms to change their algorithms so that they direct more traffic towards South African media companies. And that's not all. They want to take American social media companies to task over the spread of misinformation. Pretoria wants to make them liable for misinformation posted online. Now, you may or may not agree with these recommendations, but that's not even the point here. The point being made is political. Look at the bigger picture. This is a message from South Africa. It wants to reel the Americans in. It's not afraid of clashing with big tech, especially companies being favored by the Trump administration. Because look at the recent exchanges. Earlier this month, Trump lashed out at South Africa over a new land law there in South Africa. Trump said Pretoria was treating white South Africans, quote unquote, very badly. So he stopped all US aid to South Africa. Perhaps he was hoping to make them fall in line. Instead, this was the response.
Are concerned about the potential impact of the decision by the United States government to suspend some of its funding for HIV and TB programs in African countries for 90 days. Now, this funding that we get accounts for about 17% of our country's HIV spend. We will not be deterred. We are, as South Africans, a resilient people, and we will not be bullied.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is walking a tightrope, trying his best to limit the fallout of Trump's order. But he can't be seen as weak either, so he's making excuses for Washington, like he did at the recent G20 event. It was held in Johannesburg. Trump's Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, pulled out of the event. This is how Ramaphosa explained it.
This is not a boycott. This can be ascribed to a whole number of reasons, which he has stated, which we note. And we have resolved that we will, in the diplomatic process, be able to have those matters discussed, to have those matters dealt with, so that we are able to iron out wrinkles that may have appeared in our relationship.
He was playing good cop here. At the same time, one of his ministers was playing bad cop. The minister said South Africa was willing to work with Russia and Iran on nuclear projects. This is significant because remember, the US and South Africa had an old deal, a long-standing deal on nuclear energy, a deal that expired in 2022. They've been talking about reviving it. Reports say that a new deal is almost ready, but now, with the Russia and Iran rhetoric, South Africa has basically made a threat. It has told Washington that it has other options. So Trump should not try to push his luck. How will the US respond? Both the nuclear and now to both the nuclear and now the tech challenge, how will he respond? The Americans have already stopped aid. Will they target trade next? Whoever wins this game of international chicken, one thing is clear, it is ordinary citizens, both South African and American, who will ultimately pay the price. Now let's turn our focus to England, to the bleakness taking hold in Manchester, and I'm not talking about the weather there. I mean the bleak tidings coming from the city's legendary football club, Manchester United, or Man United as they're called. They have announced another round of layoffs. 200 more people are set to lose their jobs at the club. 250 others were fired a few months ago. This club was once a footballing powerhouse. Now it is laying off people to fix finances. And in a bizarre twist, their management has taken the axe to an unexpected target, the United staff canteen. Gone are the days of free lunches for the staff. Instead, they will now be offered one free fruit. And the knowledge that they could be following their lunch out the door. Here's our report.
Manchester United are the most successful club in English football. Even today, that record stands. United have won 20 top-flight titles, one more than their arch-rivals Liverpool, though that could change this year. But, at least for a few more months, United remain alone on top of the charts. However, you probably wouldn't think that was the case, considering the news emerging from the storied stands of Old Trafford. Look at this headline. Manchester United have closed the staff canteen. The club is desperate to save money. So desperate, it'll deny its long-time staffers a decent meal. Instead of lunch, they'll be given a solitary piece of fruit, apparently free of charge. But let's see how long that lasts. Because the Man United bigwigs are on a mission to pinch every penny they possibly can. Axing the staff canteen is projected to save a 7-figure sum, basically about £1 million. This might sound like a trivial amount for a club of Man United's stature. However, it's anything but. You see, decades of financial mismanagement have led the club to its current predicament. Their coffers have been bleeding since the early 2000s, since the club was taken over by the much-loathed Glazer family. And, like with most tales of destitute nobility, the problem was identified too late. United kept winning titles, so the growing rot was overlooked. The seriousness of the problem only became apparent much later, after Sir Alex Ferguson retired in 2013 and the titles dried up. Then there was nothing to paper over the cracks. Things came to a head in the 2019-2020 season, when football stadiums were closed to the public because of the coronavirus pandemic. Ticket revenue dried up, and United recorded a financial loss. It was the first of 5 years of ruin. The club has been making losses every year since. This has been for a number of reasons. United makes exorbitant debt payments, courtesy the Glazer takeover in the early 2000s. Then there are the astronomical wages, even for some mature players like the Brazilian Casemiro. Man United had figured a while back that something had to be done, so part of the club was auctioned off. Jim Ratcliffe, Britain's one-time richest man, bought a minority stake in Man United last year. He injected millions in exchange for about 30% of the club, and he was expected to be their saviour. But his tenure has also been marked by mismanagement. Look at this. Exceptional items cost United £14.5 million. Quite ambiguous, right? Well, this amount is for severance fees. Ratcliffe fired former manager Erik ten Hag in October and gave him over £10 million as a goodbye present. Then Ratcliffe fired another top staffer, United's former sporting director. The man was given the boot in about 5 months, and despite the short tenure, his severance was over £4 million, or 4 staff canteens worth. You can see how the financial mismanagement continues at Man United, and how ordinary employees are paying the price. 200 of them are about to get fired. This is over and above the 250 fired by Ratcliffe last year. And that won't be the end of it. Fans will face the brunt too. Ticket prices will be hiked to £66 per game, with no discounts for children or the elderly. It's that bad. And it will get worse. Man United currently sit at 15th place in the English Premier League. There are just 12 matches to go this season. If they don't improve their standings, the club could lose another £20 million. So it seems that the bleak days in Manchester have only just begun.
Let's turn to Bangladesh now, where chaos has become a way of life. When India says it, Dhaka's leaders do not like it. They think we are meddling. Well, how about their own army chief? That's right. Bangladesh's army chief has spoken out. His name is General Waqaruzzaman. He has slammed Bangladesh's politicians. He says they're too busy vilifying each other, and the result? Deteriorating law and order. The army chief has urged politicians to stop the infighting and bickering. If not, he says Bangladesh's independence could be at risk.
If you cannot forget your differences and work together, if you engage in mudslinging and infighting, the independence and sovereignty of this country will be at risk. I am telling you today, otherwise you will say that I did not caution you. There are a few reasons for the deteriorating law and order situation in Bangladesh. The first reason is that people are busy fighting amongst themselves, vilifying each other. This provides a perfect opportunity for outsiders who can take advantage of the current situation.
Now, this is a very big statement, especially for an army chief to make. The question is, will Muhammad Yunus accept this criticism? Or is the general an Indian proxy too? We haven't heard from the interim regime yet, but this conflict is not new. Reports say the army has been losing patience with Yunus, mainly because of 2 reasons. One, the refusal to hold elections. At first, Yunus wouldn't even give a timeline. He refused to say when elections could be held. Finally, it was the army chief who set a deadline. He said polls would be held before the end of 2025. That is the first reason. Secondly, the army wants to return to the barracks. General Waqar feels military regimes are unpopular in Bangladesh, so he wants to remain out of politics and public eye. But right now, that's impossible. Mobs are taking matters into their own hands. They're destroying public property, but the army is standing by helplessly. Apparently, the general does not like that. He feels it is hurting the army's image, which is why he seems to have spoken out publicly. His attack was not on Yunus specifically, but you get the drift of it. And it's not just domestic policy. This chaos is evident in Bangladesh's foreign policy too. India's foreign minister spoke about it on Saturday. He said Dhaka is blaming India for almost everything. He also asked the Yunus regime to make up its mind on India. Does it want good relations or not? Listen to this.
They have to make up their mind what kind of relationship they want with us. Because if every day somebody in Bangladesh who's in this interim government which they have made up for themselves, if they stand up and blame India for everything, and some of the things if you look at their reports are absolutely ridiculous. You can't, on the one hand, say, oh, I would now like to have good relations with you, but I get up every morning and blame you for everything which goes wrong.
Dhaka has responded to Minister Jaishankar. They say they want good working relations with India. But how do you do that? Is it by attacking minorities in Bangladesh? Or by destroying symbols of the 1971 war? Or by hosting Pakistani generals, or by taking those generals to sensitive areas, or by blaming India for floods in your country, or by obsessing over Sheikh Hasina's extradition? If so, then yes, Dhaka is working to improve its ties with India. But let's be real here. Yunus is doing everything he can to antagonize India. This month he signed a deal with Pakistan. Bangladesh will be buying white rice from Pakistan. The first shipment is around 50,000 tons. It has already set off from Karachi. Again, this is very significant because Bangladesh and Pakistan never traded directly. This is their first direct trade since 1971, and it's not even a fair deal. Bangladesh was already buying white rice from Vietnam, around $474 per ton. But Dhaka is paying $499 to Pakistan. I guess this is fair trade, Yunus style. The fact is, the ball is in Bangladesh's court. India has repeatedly tried to work with the new regime, but Yunus is unable to move on. He is obsessed over the past. Even the army chief has warned him about it. Yes, his motives may be different, but the advice is not really bad. Bangladesh's leaders need to get their act together. If not, the country's future is at risk. Our next story is about Starbucks. The coffee giant has jumped on the layoff bandwagon. Starbucks is laying off more than 1,000 workers globally. Plus, it is trimming 30% of its menu, bringing back handwritten notes on cups, not charging extra for non-dairy milk, and offering free refills. Now, nothing screams crisis like free refills. So what's going on at Starbucks? Why is the coffee behemoth in trouble? Here's a report.
Starbucks got a humble start in 1971 when it first opened its doors in Seattle. It has come a long way since. With more than 40,000 stores across 80 countries, the Green Mermaid enjoys an image of universal recognition. After all, this coffee giant pioneered the concept of the third place, meaning a place where people want to hang out outside of their homes and workplaces. So, the traditional Starbucks experience usually went like this: being greeted by name, having a friendly conversation with the barista, and curling up in a cozy chair with a customized drink that tastes good. But over the past decade, this has changed. The comfy chairs have largely disappeared, replaced by hard wooden ones. There's a long waiting line. The baristas are too busy to talk to you or greet you at the door. So now it's mostly expensive lattes, with the poor experience complimentary. But the roast aside, this coffee behemoth is struggling. Foot traffic is down. Global sales are slipping. They saw a 4% dip in the first quarter of the company's fiscal year 2025, which ended in December last year. Sales fell 4% in the United States as well, which is the fourth consecutive quarterly decline in the company's largest market, and by 6% in China, which is the coffee giant's second largest market. It's all thanks to stiff competition from cheaper alternatives. So the new Starbucks CEO, Brian Niccol, wants to align the stars again. He wants to restructure the coffee chain, streamline operations, and start firing people. Because apparently that is any giant firm's go-to when it wants a makeover. Starbucks plans to lay off 1,100 corporate employees. The coffee giant has about 361,000 baristas the world over. They are not included in the layoffs. This news is for the 16,000 corporate employees who will be let go so that Starbucks can quote-unquote operate more efficiently. This comes amid a range of changes as part of the company's Back to Starbucks rollout. Niccol's plan is to bring back the personal coffeehouse experience and to humanize the global chain. Baristas, for example, must scribble messages on people's coffee cups again, so you can expect the painful "thanks a latte" puns. Coffee must reach customers within 4 minutes. Non-dairy milk fees will not be charged. Refills will be free. Condiment bars will return, and about 30% of the items on the menu will be trashed. You see, Starbucks is a victim of its own success. It pioneered the customized coffee drink. Eventually, this led to long waits and brewed complacency in Starbucks, which stopped innovating itself. In 1995, Starbucks invented the Frappuccino. In 2003, it debuted the pumpkin spice latte. In 2006, it became the first major US chain to put matcha on its menu. In 2014, it popularized the cold foam, the lightly whipped sweetened cream. But now the only recent menu addition that comes to mind is the olive oil latte, which has been accused of being a laxative masquerading as a coffee. And this is not a good look. Starbucks went from espresso to chai tea lattes and in the process lost touch with what the customers want. Back to Starbucks wants to regain that and woo back its clientele. But only time will tell if Starbucks' star will rise again or if it has had its time in the sun.
OpenAI and Microsoft. They were once the golden couple of artificial intelligence. Microsoft poured billions into OpenAI, giving it the computing power it needed. In return, OpenAI gave Microsoft exclusive access, helping it stay ahead in the AI race. It seemed like the perfect partnership. Power, resources, and cutting-edge technology. But like many great love stories, this one too may be heading for a breakup. Why? Because of clashing visions. OpenAI believes that AI is still booming. It wants more computing power to keep up. It's pushing for expanding AI infrastructure. Microsoft, however, is hesitating. Reports say it is cancelling data center leases. That's because its CEO, Satya Nadella, is not very sure. He believes while there is need for computing power, it's important to not overdo it. So Microsoft is taking a measured approach. It will expand, but within set limits.
At some point, the supply and demand have to map. That's why I'm tracking both sides of it. You can go off the rails completely when you are hyping yourself with the supply side versus really understanding how to translate that into real value to customers.
Now, a quick primer here. The Microsoft-OpenAI partnership began in 2019, 3 years before ChatGPT came out. Microsoft invested $1 billion into OpenAI. It saw this as an opportunity to win the AI race. By 2023, Microsoft had invested $13 billion in OpenAI. Its products are integrated. OpenAI relies on Microsoft's infrastructure, so it's quite the symbiotic relationship. But not anymore, because now OpenAI is looking for alternatives. And who will replace Microsoft? The Stargate Initiative, the $500 billion AI project endorsed by Donald Trump. The partners include OpenAI, SoftBank, and Oracle. So by 2030, OpenAI expects to get 75% of its computing power from here. But beyond the internal politics, let's look at the bigger picture. Until 2024, developing AI models was not just complex, it was also quite expensive. Tech giants poured in billions of dollars, pushing spending to record highs. Take OpenAI, for example. In 2024, its cash burn hit $2 billion. This year, it is projected to soar to $7 billion. By 2027, it could reach $20 billion, and profitability is not expected until 2030. This is because of rapid expansion. OpenAI is moving very fast, building more computing centers, developing faster models, and that kind of speed comes at a cost, a massive cost. For years, this was seen as the only way forward in AI, but then came China's DeepSeek, an AI model built for mere millions. And suddenly, the West had to ask itself, are they burning more cash than they have to? Can AI be developed more efficiently? More importantly, is there really demand for so much AI? And that last point is what Satya Nadella is concerned about. He thinks the AI market is concentrated. Right now, there is an oversupply of everything, especially computing power, and that means only one thing. If the demand is not enough, not high enough, the prices will go down.
I am thrilled that I'm going to be leasing a lot of capacity in 27-28 because I look at the builds and I'm saying, this is fantastic. The only thing that's going to happen with all the compute builds is the prices are going to come down.
And Satya Nadella is not the only one who's thinking on these lines. The markets seem to agree with him. The last few years have seen an AI boom. Tech stocks have surged, but hedge funds are now reducing their holdings in big tech. That is because of two reasons. One, high AI capital expenditure, and two, the underperformance of such stocks. Look at Wall Street today. 6 out of 7 big tech stocks opened in the red. So hedge funds are dumping these stocks. They are diversifying their investments. What does all of this mean? Is AI demand truly shrinking? When it started, AI's future seemed limitless, but now the industry is facing a reckoning. The money is flowing slower, the risks are growing bigger, and the promises, well, they're starting to look expensive. So is this a temporary slowdown, or is this the start of a reality check? Either way, the age of blind AI optimism may be getting over. The companies that survive won't be the ones that spend the most, but the ones that spend the smartest. For our last story tonight, let's talk about Mars, the fourth planet from the Sun in our solar system. The red planet is a freezing world. It has punishing radiation, but in some ways it is similar to Earth. Mars has weather. It has seasons. It has volcanoes, canyons, and polar ice caps. And once upon a time, Mars boasted beaches as well. This is according to a new study. It says that about 4 billion years ago, Mars was home to sandy beaches and an ocean. So where did they go? And what does this discovery mean for our ambitions of colonizing Mars? Here is a report.
Are you making plans for the summer? If you can get your hands on a time machine, scientists have a fascinating suggestion to make. Believe it or not, it's Mars. Yes, the rugged and tan planet with its punishing radiation and freezing temperatures that can plummet to as low as minus 140 degrees Celsius. Sure, Mars may not seem like a prime holiday spot, but if you go back just about 4 billion years, it would be the perfect destination for a summer holiday. Because once upon a time, this red planet boasted of beaches. Between 2021 and 2022, Chinese scientists sent a rover to Mars. It travelled about 2 kilometers on the planet, and now its findings have been published in a new study. Scientists have found evidence of sandy beaches and a large ocean on the Martian surface, which existed about 3.5 to 4 billion years ago when Mars had a thicker atmosphere and a warmer climate. The rover has detected sand-like material between 35 to 115 feet below the surface, and this material is sloped in the same direction. This is a lot like the sand sloped at an angle on the shorelines of Earth's beaches, and the similarities don't end here. Scientists say that these beaches would have been formed like they do on Earth through waves and tides. This may sound surprising, but this discovery adds to previous findings which point to the presence of an ocean and flowing rivers on Mars, including signs of ancient floods, the evidence of liquid salty water in the ground, the presence of valley networks and sedimentary rocks. In fact, last year, NASA discovered a reservoir of liquid water on Mars. They found it deep in the crust of the planet, trapped in small cracks and pores of rocks. It may not sound like much, but this reservoir is enough to make up a whole ocean that can cover the entire surface of the planet. These discoveries are crucial, and there are two main reasons why. First, the findings help us learn a lot about past life on Mars. It is thought that the earliest life on Earth began in locations where there's land, shallow water, and air. All three elements are often found on the shorelines of beaches. So if Mars had shorelines as well, there could be evidence of ancient living beings on the planet. And this lays the groundwork for follow-up missions to look for signs of past life. There's another reason why discoveries of Martian water are important. They set us up for missions of future habitability. Humans, well, mostly the billionaires among us, want to colonize Mars, and the presence of water on the planet makes this goal much more achievable. So little signs which point to that bring us closer to conquering the cold desert planet.
And now it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. In South Korea, a dramatic bridge collapse kills 3 people. Israel holds a funeral procession for a slain Hamas hostage after the return of his body from Gaza. And in Colombia, police arrest a man for smuggling 400 doses of cocaine in his wig. Finally, we are taking you back in history. On this day in 1986, Filipino President Ferdinand Marcos was ousted. Marcos ruled the Philippines for over 2 decades, imposing martial law and suppressing dissent. But an uprising and international pressure made him flee the country. His son is the current president of the Philippines. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
On November 10th, this year at 2:45 in the morning, the chairman.
I am pagtutol ng mamamayang Pilipino.
גדל והתקדש ומרבה.
על פי בקשת המשפחה, הטקס מסתיים כאן וממשיכים כפי הסדר שנקבע.
Proceder